Hey, welcome here to Artichoke Music. This is Acoustic Village, which oddly has no acoustic instruments tonight. But it's not Virtual Village, it's the real thing. And since the pandemic started, we've been having Virtual Village on Zoom, and it's kept our Artichoke Music community alive and together, but kind of missed the real thing here, Bob. So we've been doing Virtual Village, and this was going to be virtual too. Then Mr. Sturry, my co-host, just said, let's go live, let's go live. So we are live with it. Mr. Sturry, this is your doing. And
which means that whatever goes wrong, I get the blame for it.
He's been a great co-host so far. I say, if that's the co-host, then I must be the Chinook. And so that's my story for the night. Ankariska Shawisha. Hey, so Bob, tell us what we have tonight. What's our lineup? Who do we got?
Well, we got quite a lineup of readers, and I think, of course, I could be guessing that what we will hear is a very broad range of poetry and prose and everything in between. And we've got, I think, 12 readers tonight, and they are under orders to not exceed 7 minutes of reading time. Otherwise, John has brought a cattle prod and will use it on you. So I think we'll get going. And first up is Stephanie Van Horn. And I'll just read, I asked each of the readers to provide a 3-sentence bio, something which wouldn't be too difficult to read, even for me. And this is what Stephanie said about herself. Stephanie Van Horn creates poems from the world around her, sometimes from childhood, sometimes travel and teaching, sometimes from whatever is before her. When she wakes up in the morning, her recent collection is in the Artichoke store. How about that? Proceeds go to Artichoke, where she bought a guitar, joined a songwriting class, and then took what she'd learned to this very stage. Stephanie, would you come up, please?
She's going to use that one. Stephanie's going to be over there. Hey, you're going over there. You can put that stool right there.
That's what we're going to do.
Adjust the mic.
I'm very poor at adjusting mics. Can you help me adjust the mic?
Yep.
Thank you.
Also, I can do that.
Adjusting mics is not my thing. I am a poet.
She's way more than a poet.
A pie maker. Okay.
She's
Yeah.
a pie maker.
I was just talking to my friend Will, whom you will hear from later, about my journey to Oregon. And these are a couple poems from the early stages of my time in Oregon. If you've lived in the Oregon countryside, you know it's not a particularly exciting place sometimes. And I was at the beginning of my Buddhist practice, and every day I walked from my house down to the mailbox with my dog. And rather than zone out and not notice, I decided that my practice was to notice what I was seeing and pay attention. So I'm going to read one poem about that, and then John is going to help me with a second poem. In the lane, the dog and I scatter the same sparse gravel under our feet each morning, startled to the sudden rockets of the same 3 frightened quail. We push the fog, cold silk on our faces, back to the ocean. Summon the creek to rise over riprap again and again throughout the turning year. In May, heat and rain, the glow of salmonberry, cool towers of foxglove from the shadows. August, the Queen Anne's lace shoots up again, dust catchers after the road crew's cutting. October, the furred caterpillars crossing the stones have never been so small. A mild winter, a long, hot autumn. Small, repeated observations. How white flowers cartwheel like the Mayan calendar. First yarrow, then Queen Anne's lace, and pearly everlasting ends the summer cycle. How the dog forgets, and so knows best how to rise and walk the lane. And so in that lane was a bee tree. So John's going to help me with a poem I've called Report from the Bee Tree.
Where did you find it?
Where the gravel road stays dark all day, shaded by the oldest maple. That's the bee tree.
When did you find it?
Last year. Then I forgot how the summer bees chant, surround the air, gold chains looped, leaving the bee tree.
What do you see?
At 6 a.m. today, just a dead mass in cold air. Only the knife-edge shine of a single wing, a great socket in the face of the tree, the bees, its shining eye.
Who else knows this?
Neighbor Geraldine, but her husband, Louis the bee man, died this spring. The Valium she takes makes her forgetful. Some days, I'm the only human memory of the tree.
If you forget?
Histories pass. Knowledge of great activities is easily lost. Why not of bees?
And if the bees forget?
They won't. They dance, leave each day, return on the leading strings of language, their dance.
If they leave and don't return?
In Spain, I watched a village call back their bees using stone on stone, a guttural knocking, circling the church where the bees had swarmed. A mad woman sang to them back at the hives.
Could you call them back? Give stone its mate? Know the mad woman's song? Dance like bees? Weave a light language of fragments? Tell me again what you see.
Memory masked, history honeycombed, knowledge dancing.
What will you do with your life?
I don't know. Day after day, I return to the bee tree.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, Bob,
Well, we have to do the housework,
we have to do the housework over
Yep.
there.
right?
And
And then next up, I think, is
Mr. Gary Furlow.
Gary Furlow. Yeah.
And Gary's usually running the sound and the video and problem solving. When we do our virtual village, there's always something new that comes up, and I call him Whack-A-Mole Gary because he manages to solve every single problem we have. And I've gotten to know Gary much better since working with him, and he's a great guy, he's a great musician, and he's got a really good backstory to growing up in New Orleans, and he likes road trips.
That's nothing left for me to say. Thank you all very
right.
much. Good night.
So, Gary Furlow.
I was in one of Matt Meehan's songwriting classes. We've all been in that situation. And you get, your group of words or something to write, and I wasn't coming up with anything. And so I decided on my own to do a little free write, just sit down, and the first thing that popped in my head, I was going to write it down. So this is what came out. I come to sing of dirt, powerful dirt, simple, noble dirt, the joy, the power of dirt. It's under our fingernails and soils our shirts. It's under our feet and between our toes, and it's been there forever, as only God knows. The end result of time, decay, chaos, indifference, wind, rain, friction, grinding, a confetti of chemicals and flotsam and jetsam, and it's the Earth's living skin. For millennia, wanderers have trod on it, great historic battles fought on and for dirt. Now, desert sand, it's kind of perverted to me. It's sterile, unfinished. It's in its transition from rock. And rock, well, it's harsh, slow to yield. Noble, yes, in its cragginess, but we know it aspires to someday, centuries in the future, as an alluvial fan, perhaps, to become part of dirt. Now, it could be stones and pebbles and chips and flints, peat, fermentations of compounds so complex that geologists, horticulturists, engineers, agronomists, chemists, geographers, ecologists, biologists, and microbiologists, silviculturists, pedologists, and edaphologists, sanitarians, and archaeologists will spend their career, a lifetime, probing its makeup. Now, be careful when you flirt with dirt, because you might think that it's mostly inert. And you can fiddle with it, and you can't get hurt, but dirt is not completely inert. It's remarkable, dynamic, and ert. It might be a cocoon shell, countless fallen leaves, tiny twigs, grass clippings, toenails, something from ancient ferns, noble branches, effluent products of the chipper, meteor dust or comet tailings, dinosaur bones ground down for millennia, worm parts, unspeakable things from the crime scene, remains of the meadow that this once was, or the forest, or the seabed, or the mountainside, or that volcanic explosion, dust from faraway places with strange-sounding names, producing that hollow sound of a driver tapping on the T, a shovel slice through the veneer of grass, the thudding of hitting a root. And it's the industrial vast rows of corn and beans laid on it, and we know that's a bit of a perversion, but I prefer the simple beds of tomatoes and vines, pride of growing your own, cultivated with your hands, harvesting the pumpkins for the kids at the end of the season, where your fingerprints and your palm-reading lines are filled with the fine etchings of rich black dirt. It's the biblical firmament, Atlas's burden, Newton's stage, if you will, for when the apple falls, what stops it? The witness to evolution, to whispers, to shouts of history passing by, listening with indifference. Armies march and roll, whether it's on wooden-wheeled carts or the treads of a tank. Boots made in Hoboken, tires from Detroit, downtown sandals and flip-flops from Spanish Harlem, too. Now here's a scene. A picnic rests on the ground, on a blanket grandma or sister sewed or bought or inherited. Such comfort on the world. And it's whether it's you're on a playground or a ball field or a superhighway or your own backyard, it all comes to rest on the dirt. So many years residing above it, till a handful tossed, a shovelful turned, starts eternity for so many. Our own 6 by 4 by 6 foot cube, resting in it, until we are indistinguishable from the noble, eternal, simple, profound dirt. Thank you.
All right, wait, let's wipe that microphone off there.
Yeah, I got it.
That was great, Gary. That's a side of you I hadn't seen before. That was dirty. Gary got him told a dirty joke.
Now settle
a
down.
bunch of dirty.
Settle down, children.
You know, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Norris, but I do believe in the Forest Service they call that the basic resource. It's like the soil is considered the basic resource and everything else. And I know farmers think about that's what they're really protecting soil.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, next up is Jim Pritz, and here's what he asked me to say about him. You can come up, Jim. Yeah. Jim Pritz is a guitar player who has put his guitar down for the evening, and he'll tell you a story instead and read you his poems. After all, a poem is just a song looking for a melody. Jim Prince.
Thank you, sir. That's one theory anyway. I've heard people say that a poem is absolutely not a song. But that wasn't going to serve my purposes very well, so I decided to. I'm going to be reading 2.5 pieces.
Okay.
Well, one is extremely short, and I want to be able to get it in under the 7-minute limit, because I don't want to get the hook. So I'll be reading 2.5 pieces. They're all original. And the first one was a print of my original short true story published in the 1998 Napa Valley Music and Wine Festival official program. So we did it. The Napa Valley Music and Wine Festival survived another year. We'll somehow pay the bills later. I'm sitting in the audience now, exhausted after working the last day of the festival, and the Kingston Trio is on stage playing "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley, hang down your head and cry." I'm blown away to think that I'm watching the guys who arguably started the free speech movement in this country by being one of the first folk singing groups of the 1950s to record a crossover hit in the beatnik era. And that, in turn, kicked the free speech movement along, long hair, etc. And I revive an idea I hatched a few days earlier. I get up, go up to the festival office, and grab my late father's homemade stand-up bass. I carry it down to the backstage area because I have the red badge that gets me anywhere I want to go. After all, I'm the president of the board of directors. I walk behind the stage to the artist rest area and look up into the semi-darkness behind the rear curtains of the stage. There sits Nick Reynolds, the short one who plays that little tenor Martin. He's an old man now and crippled up by arthritis, but he can still walk, so he walks to about 50 concerts a year, euphemistically speaking. It's a poignant picture, and wishing I had a camera, I snap the mental images a photographer takes when he doesn't have his Nikons. But Nick is unapproachable because he is up a flight of stairs, resting in a very cramped aisle while the other band members cover for him, and I don't think I can get the bass to where he is without doing a curly. So I back up and just watch a legend as he adjusts his painful bones and takes another couple of minutes to compose himself. He sees me watching about 12 feet away and smiles, then gets up and goes back on stage. Bob Shane, the D28 player, comes out the same exit that Reynolds walked through and climbs down the stairs to the ground level rest area. He walks over to the folding chair placed there for musicians and sits down. He pulls out a crushed pack of Camels, flips one into his mouth and lights it. I think it's now or never. I haul the bass over to him and he smiles at me, another fan, another smile. I say, "Hi Bob, could you do me a favor?" Then I tell him the story of how more than 30 years ago, me and my brother played guitars, and my dad felt left out, so he built him a bass out of what was left over from working with wood, and how the Ballad of the MTA was his favorite song to play with us. And I asked if he would sign my dad's bass. Shane grabs the bass by the overbuilt redwood neck, slaps a couple of notes out of the original G string, and says, "This is a fine bass, I'd be glad to." So he grabs the felt tip marker that I hold in my hand and signs up on the upper bout to Ray, Charlie Got Home, the Kingston Trio, Bob Shane. Flushed with victory, I sat down next to him and asked if he'd ever been to Kingston, Jamaica. He'd never been there, but he'd flown over it a couple of times. Then he says with a chuckle, "I'm doing this because I really love it and I need the money." He shakes my hand and repeats, "That's a fine bass," and walks back into the legend. And he's listening to the banter on stage between songs when he hears his joke, and he says, "They're doing my jokes, I better get going." I carry the bass outside of the lantern tent and into the darkness, and as I look up at the stars, I hear the old man on stage start a very familiar song. "Come and listen to the story of a man named Charlie." It was fine and powerfully sung. When he got there, the conductor hollered, "One more nickel." Charlie could not get off of that train. Oh, will he ever return? No, he'll never return, and his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever 'neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. This next piece, it was written for my father, and you need to know a little bit about him. He was, Raymond A. Pritz never rode a horse, but all his life wished he'd been a cowboy. A Pennsylvania kid, he'd got the thrill of his life when the Army Air Corps stationed him out west after World War II. In 1986, when he died, the military buried him with honors at Eagle Point National Cemetery in Southern Oregon. My dad was a broomstick cowboy, living on bacon and beans, up on old paint and leading old Dan on a big cattle drive in his dreams. Dad was a wannabe wrangler, for he never roped no steer, and his 10-gallon hat he kept on a shelf with the rest of the cowboy gear. He always yearned for the big drive across the wide open Wyoming space and to wrangle a herd on a smart, fast horse with a shit-eating grin on his face. The song of the West, no. In his dreams, no bronco could toss him. He could dig in his spurs and hold on. But he did his 8 seconds in a soft leather chair, humming the tumbleweed song. The song of the West was the song he loved best. At home on the range, you could find him. The streets of Laredo, he knew only too well as his daydreams rolled on to guide him. And with his old mouth harp, he could lose himself in the song of the Westward Ho. Its lonesome sound was the song of his heart, a song he could never let go. Yeah, my dad was a broomstick cowboy, but this ain't no woeful tale, for when he died, the cavalry planted him at the end of the Oregon Trail. Thank you. Here comes the half, and it's short enough. Am I getting the hook yet?
You got 25 seconds.
25 seconds. So in parting, I say to you with this one more original poem, a thought has a life of its own, for out of the mind and into the pen and then back onto paper, it's living again. And so shall our friendship continue to be, as long as your thoughts keep coming to me. Thank you. I'll see you around the campfire.
Right on the money.
Oh, good.
That was cool.
Jim's been a real stalwart performer for our virtual village. And he's one of those ones that I call like a professional amateur. He just takes the amateur performances very seriously and very professionally. And
None of us are
Appreciate
getting paid tonight, are we?
you're not getting paid? Oh, man.
That's an old joke.
Okay.
Who's next?
I think Bill Valenti
Bill
is up there.
Valenti, and here's what he wrote about himself. Citizen of the world, freelance protagonist, opinionated songwriter. And he told me at a party where we were both drinking that he was the first American banker to do business in Ulaanbaatar. So, and why not?
I also wanted to add that Jim was one of our co-hosts for what was our show we did? I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
But he was a co-host, and Bill was a co-host for Art of the Protest song. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you
So,
both forget the same thing, it's okay.
There we go. Okay.
All right, Bill.
I just brought the boots to sort of punctuate the story a little bit. These are actually from Mongolia. People still wear them these days. So I call this outbound, inbound journey, a single journey with two tales. So the outbound part, Beijing, China, July 1990. A hot, steamy, crummy day. Heading to the airport for my third or fourth trip to Mongolia, which had recently reopened after 70 years of being shut up tight as a Soviet satellite country. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the first Western businessmen to be allowed into Mongolia when I lived in Hong Kong. And I became a consultant to the Mongolian government on foreign investment. So I was heading to the airport to get my flight. And the crowd in the airport was a little bit different than the crowd in the first 2 or 3 flights that I'd made from Beijing to Ulaanbaatar. The first couple of times it was mostly Westerners excited to venture into this place that had been closed up tight for 70 years. World Bank people, people from the International Monetary Fund, European and American businessmen, and of course, American Christian missionaries hoping to convert all those unfortunately Buddhist people in Mongolia. So the scrum at the check-in was just what I expected. No line, but this time there were a lot of Mongolian traders who were coming back from China with these massive canvas bags full of stuff that they'd bought to bring back to Mongolia to sell. So I was really concerned that maybe the plane was going to be a little bit overloaded with all this stuff that was going to be stuck into it on a hot summer day in Beijing. But I just stayed in the groove and got my ticket and got on the bus to go out to the tarmac, the furthest part of the tarmac at Beijing Airport, where the only place where Mongolian Airlines could afford to park their very tired looking, retired from Aeroflot Tupolev 154 jet. I'd flown it a couple of times, but it just looked very, very weak and not very happy that day. So we sat on the bus for 2 hours. Fortunately, the bus was air conditioned, but we didn't get on the plane. Then we got off the plane off the bus into the plane, sat another 1.5 hours in the plane with no air conditioning. It was probably by then 95 degrees in Beijing. And people started stripping off their clothes and opening the emergency exits just to get some air. Then I had this image in my mind of the pilot sitting in the cockpit with a stubby pencil trying to calculate the length of runway he would need to take off in this badly overloaded, sorry-looking goddamn Tupolev 154 jet. First inkling that I shouldn't be on this plane. Really, really shouldn't be on this plane. Anyway, we rolled out. It was the longest rollout I've ever experienced. I mean, really, really took twice as long to get in the air of any other flight that I've ever been on. We got into the air, we got to cruising altitude, and a few minutes later, we hit us. And by the way, the overhead bins were stuffed to the gills. They wouldn't close. There was stuff in the overhead. There was stuff in the aisle that people had brought on. Nobody seemed to worry about that. We hit this air pocket, and the plane pitched violently. All that stuff came out. All the stuff in the aisles flew up into the air and came crashing down on people. The screams were just horrendous. I was sure that I'd made a really bad decision to be on this flight. And a couple of minutes later, to my astonishment, when things calmed down and the luggage had been restacked, the flight attendants started serving a meal. And the meal was coming down the aisle on trays, metal trays that looked like the kind of trays you'd see in a prison or a army mess hall, just, scratched, dented tin trays. And on the tray there were 4 or 5 items. The first were 2 mutton sausage patties. Pungent, smelly, stinky, awful stuff. And in the next little section of the tray there was something that looked like sauerkraut. I wasn't sure. In the next section of the tray, there were 2 hardtack biscuits that were so hard I would never risk losing my teeth to bite into one of them. And then in the last tray, there were 2 small bottles of Mongolian vodka and 2 foil-wrapped chocolates. Well, that was my decision. I mean, I'm not going to eat any of that other stuff. So I knocked back one of the 2 bottles of Mongolian vodka, and then I unwrapped one of the foil-wrapped chocolates, and it was a half a chocolate with teeth marks. Okay, so 5 days later, inbound now, back from Ulaanbaatar to Beijing. Not going to take that damn Tupolev 154 anymore, so I booked a ticket on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, a spur of which, the Trans-Siberian runs 5,800 miles, I think, from Moscow to Vladivostok. And then through Irkutsk, it makes branches off to a train that goes through Ulaanbaatar to Beijing, across the Gobi Desert, across the Great Wall of China into Beijing. 30 hours on the train. So I got on the train, and I had a very nice sleeping car on the train. And until a few minutes before the train departed, there was nobody else in the sleeping car. So I thought, oh, I'm going to have a nice, quiet, enjoyable ride, maybe some nice tea and some, whatever, dinners for 30 hours going through the Gobi Desert. And at the very last minute, this guy opens the door and walks in, a short, stocky Asian gentleman with wild, long hair. I mean, wild, long gray hair, huge, long gray beard, very ruddy complexion, small canvas carry-all, and a big brown paper bag. And we nodded at each other and smiled. I was curious, who is this guy? Is he Mongolian? Is he Chinese? Is he Uyghur? Is he something else? I don't know what this guy is. And he sat down, and we didn't communicate much, but about 30 minutes after the train left the station, he started to open the brown paper bag, and he took out this gigantic leg of roast mutton. And he took out a gigantic Bowie knife, and he carved off a piece of the mutton, and he offered it to me like this with both hands. And something about the way he did that, his motion and his attitude, told me that he wasn't Mongolian. And I wondered if he was, and we couldn't speak to each other. We didn't say anything more than just nodding to each other, but I was really curious to know. So when he handed this to me, I said, I speak a little Japanese. I lived in Japan. I said, "Sumimasen, Nihonjin de gozaimasu ka?" He said, "Hi, yes, I'm Japanese." And that was the icebreaker, because I speak enough Japanese to get into trouble and sometimes enough to get out of trouble. But for the next 28 hours, I shared this gigantic leg of mutton with somebody who turned out to be one of the most prominent Japanese journalists who wrote extensively about nomads in Tibet and Mongolia, and had just come back from 6 months in Mongolia, was heading back to Tokyo. So looked like a really interesting experience, and it sure was. That's my outbound and inbound story.
That's why I always carry Cliff Bars.
Well,
You just
yeah,
never
that's-
quite know when you're
no,
going to be
that's-
really hungry, and there's
that's really-
nothing that resembles
really-
food
really-
from your personal experience.
Really good advice.
Yeah. And mutton and lamb are two
Yeah.
different things.
These were retired beast of burden mutton.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Hey, I saw someone walk in here.
Yeah, I know that person.
Who is that person? Tell us who this person
That
is.
person is Anne Louise, and she happens to be my wife. And I could tell you all kinds of things about her. She is a singer, a storyteller, a songwriter as well. And the reason she's so late today is because she was co-writing another new song. Yeah, I know. It's and earlier this week when I said, do remember that you have to come up with something to read, tell, and she said, I have no idea. And so that means neither have I. And Louise.
Am I allowed to touch that to make it higher? If I wanna
Do
stand?
whatever you like with it.
So I didn't have any idea actually until I changed my shirt for co-writing to come here, and I suddenly thought what I would share with you. Because I was just back in New Jersey, the homeland, a week ago. And while I was there, I went with my sister to the places we used to spend our summers down the Jersey. Well, it wasn't really the Jersey Shore. We lived back in the woods in a shack with 3 rooms, had no bathroom, no hot water, and that's where we spent our summers. So we went to see all that, which is now all built up. But it reminded me of what happened to me when I was about 9, because I come from a big Italian family. My father's family's Italian, and they had the shacks, by the way, without the hot water. And my mother's family is Italian. And there were 5 kids in our family, and we were kind of very close together, as happens in Italian families. My brother first, and then me, and then 3 more girls. And one summer when I was about 9, my aunt and uncle, who lived in the Kittatinny Mountains in western New Jersey in a little town called Tuttle's Corner, they asked my parents if they would like to send one of us to spend the summer with them. Now, my parents chose me. I don't know if that's because I was the loudest, the noisiest, the whatever. I wanted to be a cowgirl. I don't know why they chose me, but I got to go. And I had this image that I would be a cowgirl and I would have like boots and ride a horse and it'd be so exciting. And when I got there, actually, it was a pig farm. And they had pigs and they had an enormous vegetable garden. And they didn't have any kids. And they weren't really my aunt and uncle. We just called them aunt and uncle. I actually think they were another part of the family that we didn't talk about so much, if you know what I mean. And my job was to feed the pigs, which were not, I mean, I don't know, pigs, it wasn't like Babe, the story about pigs. Pigs are, you know, I mean, they're cute when they're little, but then they're smelly and disgusting. And I had to do that. I didn't like that much. And then I had to weed the vegetable garden. I didn't like that much at all. So one day my uncle said, did I want to go fishing? And I thought that would be a better thing than pigs or weeding. But I had never been fishing before. And when you're fishing, this like place was way up in the mountains, and it was a little tiny place. You didn't go buy bait at the bait store. You dug the worms. Some of you may have done this kind of stuff. I had never done it. And not only do you have to go dig your worms, but you got to like stick them on the hook, like, you know what I mean? Like squish. Oh, it's disgusting. But it was better than weeding for that one moment. So I went down to there was a river, and I went down there and I started fishing, and they said, bring home the fish for dinner, because, you know, we ate everything we grew or caught. So I was fishing, catching these little fish, and then I caught and putting them in my bucket, and you have to take, oh God, you have to take the hooks out of them. I won't even, it's so disgusting. But I caught a catfish. And I was holding it up, and they're pretty ugly too. You know, they have those whiskers and that flat face, and they suck all the stuff up on the bottom of the river. And some people love catfish. Somebody's over there saying, probably because he's from the South, I'll bet you. He loves catfish. I didn't. But I took the thing off and put it in my pail anyway, because I was supposed to do that. And when I was done fishing, I noticed that though the other fish were dead, this catfish was still alive. So I took the fish home and gave the other fish to my aunt and uncle, and I thought I'd do an experiment, because that's what you do when you're 9, right? So I thought I'd do an experiment to see how long I could keep this fish alive with no water. So I filled the bucket with water that night, and the next morning I took him out for like an hour or 2 in the barn, and he was flipping and flopping, and he was breathing out of the water. I couldn't even believe it. It's like a magic story. Put him back in the bucket, and every day I took him out for a little more, till by the end of the week, he didn't have to go back in the water. And he followed me everywhere, flipping and flopping, and I named him Vinny, because he was going to be my pet. And he would follow me down to the garden, and I'd be weeding, and he'd be, you know, lying on one side and then lying on the other side, and I guess he'd get hot, I don't know. And then he'd follow me back to the house, a flipping and a flopping, and then I started to do what, you know, I remember this fairy tales. I had remembered them about, like, the Frog Prince, where the princess took the frog to bed, or the frog went up to the bed, and I thought, oh, I'll bring Vinny to bed with me. And I would put him on the pillow next to me. He never talked. He slept all night. He was such a good pet. And sometimes he would turn over, and he would just look at me with that eye, the one eye that was up. And I could tell him anything he never told anyone. He was a good pet. And also, the other really good thing about Vinny is, like a dog, he would come by the dining room table when we ate dinner, and I would feed him my vegetables that I didn't like, because we had to eat everything on our plates. Did you guys grow up like that? Like, you had to eat everything. So I didn't like particularly the succotash, which, some of you may know, that's carrots, corn, and lima beans. I know, exactly. It was disgusting. I didn't mind the corn, but the carrots and the lima beans I was not good with. So I would just sneak him off my plate and feed him to Vinny, and he would just nibble him right up. It was like great. So the summer went on, and I was so happy, and I guess my parents were happy to have one less kid. They never said. And it came time to go back to go to school, but I knew that if I brought Vinny back, like, he wouldn't be no good on the city streets, you know, on the pavement, flipping in the flop. It wouldn't be good for him. It'd probably take his scales off. And so I asked my parents if I could stay, and they said I could stay till Halloween. And so It's pretty exciting. I was going to stay there till Halloween. They had a one-room schoolhouse because remember, this was way up in the hills. There are still one-room schoolhouses, by the way, in the mountains of eastern Oregon, like way up there in the hills where there's just the one room for all the kids. And that's what this was like. So to go to school, I had to walk over the little bridge, over the little river, and Vinny would follow me. A flippin' and a floppin' and a flippin' and a floppin'. And some of the other kids had dogs that would wait outside, and Vinny waited outside for me. It's really fun. And then we would go home, flippin' and a floppin'. It was great. And as we got through September and October, up there in the mountains, it started to get a little cooler. And this one day, there was kind of a frost on the ground, and the bridge was a little slippery. So I'm skipping off to school like you do when you're 9, and Vinny's behind me, flipping and a flopping, and suddenly I hear a splash. And I turn around, and Vinny's not on the bridge. And I go running back, and he's fallen into the river. And he's gasping for air, and he's coming to the surface, trying to catch a breath. And I don't know what to do. And I throw myself in the river, and the water's freezing cold. And I drench, and I trying to swim to Vinny. And it was such a horrible time. And when I got to Vinny, I picked him up, and I didn't know how to do artificial resuscitation on a fish. I remembered you were supposed to push, and I pushed and pushed and pushed, and I was freezing cold, and Vinny died. And so I brought him back home to my aunt and uncle's house. It was like the saddest day of my life, practically. Brought him home to my aunt and uncle's, and first they scolded me for getting cold and going in the river and maybe almost drowning. And you know how that is, like when your parents or somebody that loves you is worried about you, they scream at you. That makes the whole thing better. I never really understood that, but I got screamed at a lot that night. And then they took Vinny, who I wanted to have a burial service for, and bury him in the garden. And they're like, no, this is a fish. It's food. And so they cooked him. Little garlic, little butter, little Parmesan. And we had Vinny for dinner. But how could I eat Vinny? He was my pet. So I sat there, and my aunt told me I had to eat what was on my plate. Remember I told you you had to eat everything on your plate before you could get up from the table? Not only was that the saddest day of my life, it was one of the longest nights of my life. And I never did eat Vinny. And that's the end of my sad story. Thank you. Am I in my 7 minutes?
No,
Am I over?
you went over.
Oh.
But she's my wife, and you know, if I had called time, what would happen?
I didn't time it on the way to the car.
And remains. So. Make me an offer, Will.
Okay, that was a fishtail. That was a fishtail. Catfish actually have amazing capacity, like those walking catfish in Africa, the one up in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. So, I met your friend out there,
Emmett.
Emmett.
All right, next up is Emmett Weedfall, and I've known Emmett for a few years now, and he has graced this stage a couple of times with me. And let me say what Emmett says about himself. He says he's a Portland, Oregon poet who reads, writes, and performs poetry. He has 2 published books of poetry by Fernwood Press and has released 1 non-musical poetry CD and 4 musical poetry CDs. He's known nationally and internationally for his lyrical poetry. And for more information about him, you can go to his website, emmettweedfall.com. Emmett.
What I notice about Emmett's name, E-M-M-E-T-T, is he's got 2 E's, 2 M's, and 2 T's. I like that.
6 ways you can stop being a racist. 6 ways you can stop being a racist. Number 1, kill yourself. Yeah, kill yourself. You'll find happiness, nirvana, bliss, and otherworldliness. Think about it. This world would be a better place without you. Number 2, when you get that urge to use racial epithets like nigger, Japs, chinks, for example, bite your tongue off. Bite your tongue so hard that it bleeds like a sieve. Then shut the hell up. Number 3, if your son or daughter brings home a boyfriend or girlfriend of any color, give that friend the benefit of the doubt. Hold a candle to the institutional and systemic racism that young man or young woman is enduring daily in America. Bequeath respect. Consider the possibility he or she genuinely cares about your son or daughter. Number 4, stop listening to racist preachers, teachers, and commentators. Number 5, critical race theory isn't racist. Acknowledge the fact that criticism is not an academic critique. It's an analysis and not a value. Critical race theory takes a serious academic look at what's been left out of America's history and how racist institutions and systems prohibited and inhibited people of color's access to the American dream. Do abhor white and black nationalism. Regard them as an anathema to the creed, ideals, and values that are America. For example, we the people hold these truths to be self-evident. All men, women, people of color, gay, lesbian, bisexual, cissexual, isosexual, transgender, queer, marginalized, disabled, and poor whites, etc., are created equal. Get a grip. Dr. King was right. Our destiny is inextricably tied to each other's destiny. And finally, number 6. If these admonitions don't work for you, kill yourself. I'm not kidding. I'm just, kill yourself. You will be happy. Think about it. This world will be a better place without you. And I would appreciate it. Sorry I'm using paper. These are just some new works, pandemic works. So haven't had time to actually memorize it, so I got to use paper. Got one more for you. It's called Imagine That. Imagine that. I walked to the edge of the earth and found it to be round. No surprise there. You'll get that, I'll hit you in a minute. I flung a big boomerang in the air, and for whatever reason, Bob did not come back. I pitched my tent on the White House lawn, only to be charged with trespassing on public property. Wow. I told a racist cop I was a good man, and he replied, "That's not the point, pig." Imagine that. I went to take a pee only to see a poster of the white supremacist John Wayne staring back at me. My pee burned like a raging forest fire. I got criticized for saying critical race theory is not criticism. Go figure. I told my wife, if loving you is wrong, I don't want to be right. She laughed in my face. That wench. I glanced at a blind woman and she thought I had lusted for her. Wait for it. Wait for it. It'll hit you. Well, maybe. Just maybe I did. These are random thoughts, and some are just my imagination. I will let you sort them out. I speak truth to power only to walk away feeling powerless. I'm sure you know the feeling. I write poetry seldom read by the literate, which is inconsiderate given the time I've invested in it. I perform lyrical poetry only to have some think I'm rapping. How sad. I preach the gospel not Fox News. Imagine that. And then I'm diabetic. And that's why my feet feel like pins pricking them when wearing dress shoes. I had cancer in 1998. And it ain't too late to say, I've lived this long by faith and not fate. And finally, if I should die before I wake, it wasn't at all by mistake, I think. Imagine that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. What can you say to that? Well, now I think we have a break, do we not, John?
We have a break.
Yeah.
We have a break.
That means you have to go to the bar
And visit Allison with 2 L's.
and tip heavily and get yourself a drink, and we'll be back in, 10 or so?
Yeah. Thank Gary
right.
back there and Sarah for doing
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
Gary,
Mr. Bob Howard back there. Bob,
is he there?
St. Boho, the man who kept this
that
thing
guy.
going.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a little break right now, and
Right.
we'll be back. Mr. Steary. My co-host, Mr. Bob Sterry. I've known Bob since I met him through one of our later performers, Dick Norris.
Yeah, that's right.
We did a little house concert together the same night, I do believe.
Yeah.
And Bob's been the most persistent poet reading at our open mics. And it occurred to me as the host of Acoustic Village, I said, we should have a spoken arts night. And it was a wonderful evening. It was, as I say, it's eerily quiet that night. And there's certain niches that Bob fills that I've asked him to, sometimes I'll get an idea for a song on a theme and I'll say, I know who can do that. He did the narration for My Generation once, talking.
Oh, yeah.
And he did a wonderful job of My Generation while I played guitar behind it. And then you did and Anne Louise did a great collaboration on John Lennon night for the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight. And when I first conceived of it, I said, Bob's the guy for that. So Bob's there, and he is an internationally recognized poet. At least one person has read his stuff, I'm sure, in England.
The Queen.
And somebody was seen visually, was recorded reading his book of poetry in Mexico City on the night of his poetry release here.
Yeah, that's right.
And
yeah.
that picture was sent, and it went viral, I believe. So, Mr. Bob Sterry, I'm going to turn this over to you, and he's going to read for us right now.
Thank you very much.
John, are you going to
John.
time him?
Would,
You're going to time him.
you can time me, darling,
Okay.
I got my timer right
as you have done in the past.
Time's up.
Yeah. All right. Hands up, everyone who knows and loves the Negroni. In a summer long ago, but it was called 1968. I was bored enough one lunchtime to sit and listen to a man in a pub tell me some nonsense. Pubs, of course, are and hopefully will always be constructed, at least partly, for the transfer of nonsense from one wannabe character to another. So the setting was right. And the particular pub, the Black Boy, had always been well stocked with wannabes. So the extras casting for my short drama was appropriate. This man was roughly my own age. He had a slight advantage over me, a slight advantage of actually having a career at that moment, whilst I was a soon-to-be failed chemistry student carrying only the price of 1 pint of what passed for beer in that pub in my jeans. He was a purser of some modest level in the Merchant Navy with more than £10 sterling in cash on his person. He was not in uniform. I was. He was bored, as homecoming seamen often are, returning to their rural or suburban hometown to find that the local nightlife, not to mention the vacuum of daylight hours, does not quite match that of Caracas, Buenos Aires, Monte Carlo, or even Fort Lauderdale. They become impatient to get back to their ship and pass their leave hanging around the saloon bars of pubs and golf clubs, hoping to find someone to talk to who would have even the remotest idea of what they had seen or experienced. As it happened, I actually had a friend who was also in the Merchant Navy and was also a purser for the Cunard Line. And so I knew something of this man's life before he even opened his mouth. And in a further coincidence, I knew this man's older sister and had fancied her awfully a few years before this incident. He was not much of a storyteller, and far from being fascinated by his revelations of shipboard shenanigans and beach parties with American girls, how much money he made and what his long-term plans were, I fast became as bored as he already was. But he did buy me drinks. And since I had been brought up as a polite young man, I felt it rude to snub the man. It was within half an hour of closing time. English pubs closed at around 2:30 p.m. in those days. He suggested we have a Negroni. It may have been a desperate move on his part to regain what he may have perceived as my wandering attention, or it may have been a desire on his part to get as drunk as he could before the pub actually did close. Up until this time, my experience of cocktails was limited to the gin and tonic and a taste of a whiskey and ginger, what my dear old Aunt Edna called a whiskey mac. It took quite a lot of cajoling by my new acquaintance to get the barman to agree to mix gin, sweet vermouth, and Campari together in equal parts and find a suitable glass into which he could pour the concoction. And then there was an awkward moment as he calculated the price. But the barman was as intrigued as I was, and once the price was settled, he set about his task with enthusiasm. Economically, it was the single most expensive drink I had ever enjoyed. And enjoy it I did. It was fabulous. Bitter, sweet, fruity, and cool, consuming all the ice that the pub had. The pub closed, and I wandered off to the bus station to catch a bus home. I must have stunk. Getting off the bus at my village, a girl I hardly knew stopped me to say how much she liked my sunglasses. I had forgotten I was wearing any. Roughly 39 years later, I sat at a rooftop bar in a hotel in Naples, close to the train station with my youngest brother. He'd never had a Negroni. The bartender here was adept at correcting this shortage in his experience, and we had two before setting off to find a restaurant for dinner amongst the piles of garbage that decorate the streets of that dense and fragrant city. Thank you. Yeah.
What are the ingredients again, Bob? It's
1 part gin, 1 part sweet vermouth, 1 part Campari. I'll make you one.
on ice.
Well, you can have it shaken up on rocks.
Or stirred. Okay. Will Horniak says, from Irish myths and Russian fairy tales to the Brothers Grimm and Oregon tall tales, Will Horniak weaves a wide web of oral traditions into engaging performances. Will worked as a newspaper reporter in South America. What country? Peru, and a carpenter before turning to full-time storytelling in 1994. He resides in Milwaukie, Oregon. That's IE out there. The correct spelling. Adam's out there's got a Milwaukee Brewers shirt when it's the EE. But dwells most of the time in his own imagination, mundus imaginalis, where he refused to let facts intrude upon a good story. All right. Will. Fire at Will.
See. Do you want to wipe your mic before you start? Or?
Sure. Good. Yeah, try this. Oh, should I wipe it off? Is that? Is there a clean?
No, just use a dirty one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. All right. How y'all doing out there? We have a small but mighty crowd. This is great. Thanks for keeping this alive, everybody. This is so great that we have this, and it's good to see people's noses and mouths again too. You know, topophilia is a word that means love of place, and I'm really a place-based person. And when I first moved to Oregon in '86, I knew I was absolutely home. And so this is my little love poem to Oregon called "Ode to Lady Topophilia." Lady Topophilia, Oregon, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love your hot, rugged, rocky, curvaceous, crooked river canyon country. I swoon at the scent of your John Day River junipers, your Oahe River pine sap, your Artichoke mountain sagebrush. But is there anything sweeter than your springtime Willamette Valley lilac planted in deep, dark alluvial soils? But Lady Topophilia, I love even the odoriferous aromas you wear at low tide, beneath dark Columbia River wharves at Astoria, where mammoth-sized sea lions sprawl over themselves like drunken sailors, barking and howling and singing off-key, while offshore, wind-whipped winter rains and deadly ocean sea swells keep sailors and fishermen anchored safely in bar rooms from Astoria to Brookings, shooting pool, swapping lives over shots and beers. Lady Topophilia, when I roam far from my Milwaukee home, birthplace of the Bing Cherry where Johnson Creek meets the mighty Willamette, I am not truly home until I have made a pilgrimage to your Willamette River shores, not until I breathe in that heady concoction of goose poop, muck, and mud, and rotten cottonwood leaf mulch. Not until I intrude upon the solitude of a great blue heron and send it winging ponderously upriver, rock, 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 to Willamette Falls, beneath whose waters massive sturgeon still swim, where Clackamas River Chinook villagers fished, grew plump, sang, made love, fished for 4,000 years. For 4,000 years. But Lady Topophilia, who could forget the nights when your black columnar basalt outcroppings gleamed in moonlight, high above, and far below your Deschutes River waters murmured and whispered to me, and then broke free, wild, ecstatic, through Whitehorse and Buckskin Mary and Wapanesha Rapids, and then undulated softly, slowly through rolling Sherman and Morrow County wheat fields, cloaked in your gown of white winter wheat. Lady Topophilia, I love how easily, how generously you heft, you convey massive potato and wheat-laden barges, sailboats, fishing boats, sailboards on bright Columbia waters above, and how below your currents still remember, still caress that ancient mother lode of salmon runs, Celilo Falls, where 100 cataracts of waterfalls once sang and mingled with the songs of Cayuse and Chinook and Nez Perce and Umatilla and Yakima and more and more and more for millennia. Lady Topophilia, you are ancient and you are ever new. From your fecund and fertile Tillamook Bay tidelands to your sunburned Steens Mountains, to your Albert Desert sands, from remote Imnaha, from Basque and Rome, to south winds of Port Orford and pastoral Sweet Home. You are the dew-lipped spring maiden. You are the ripe summer fruit. You are the wise autumn crone. You are the screeching wild winter hag. And I am your love slave. I am your gigolo. I am your most ardent admirer. Lady Topophilia, my Oregon, queen of my heart, muse to my soul. My love for you never, ever tires.
Next up is.
Oh, wait, I gotta say that. Well, I'm probably the longest term fourth generation Oregonian in this room, maybe, and that's great. I've been to every one of those places and experienced all of those things. And that's just about the best poem about my home state that I've ever heard. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I actually went to Milwaukee High School.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, I live right near there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I went to all those schools, and grew up right there, and fished Johnson Creek when I was, I'd sneak down after school and fish, drop grasshoppers there, and then catch cutthroat out of Johnson Creek, and it's thank you very much there.
That
All
was,
right.
Yeah, that was great. William Stafford, eat your heart out. So, next, Illinois Doug. So, Illinois Doug Tracy says he is a musician, folklorist, and troubadour. He's part of a long tradition of entertainers who share encyclopedic collections of American songs with their audiences. During the 1960s, Doug was an active member of the blossoming folk music scene that emerged in and around Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, come on up, Doug.
Here you go.
This one right here is
Well, I am not a poet. I wrote too many papers as a management major and an MBA. Or not real. So I look back and I learned these and came across these in 1964 from Mason Williams, who, Classical Gas and the Smothers Brothers. And these came in a book called Bicyclist Dismount. And I heard them first from Jim Connor and I can't say it now, two boys from Alabama. So this is Mason Williams' Them Poems, if you've not heard them. Apparently the Kingston Trio recorded some. So I've got some here. They go quickly. They really go quickly. Honest. So this first one is Them Banjo Pickers. Them banjo pickers, mighty funny ways, same damn song 3 or 4 days. Them banjo pickers, all they know, Cumberland Gap, do-si-do. Them banjo pickers talking about strings, banjo pegs, and other such things. Them banjo pickers, poker face mugs, never do smile, just play scrugs. Them banjo pickers never get sick picking them banjos, pick, pick, pick. Them dog kickers. How about them dog kickers? Ain't they crumbs kicking them doggies in they buns? Kicking them Afghans, kicking them mutts, kicking them puppy dogs' poor little butts. Look at them dog kickers, ain't they cute? Some use a shower shoe, some use a boot. Them dadgum dog kickers, ain't they mean? Run around kicking every dog what's seen. How to be a dog kicker? Don't need a ticket. Find an old dog, haul off and kick it. This one you'll enjoy. Them moose goosers. How about them moose goosers? Ain't they recluse up in them boondocks, goosing them moose? Goosing them huge moose, goosing them tiny, goosing them meadow moose in they hiney. Look at them moose goosers, ain't they dumb? Some use an umbrella, some use a thumb. Them obtuse moose goosers sneaking through the woods, poking them snoozy moose in they goods. How to be a moose gooser? It'll turn you puce. Get your gooser loose and rouse a drowsy moose. I've had to practice these. I did Them duck pluckers. Pluckers. How about them duck pluckers? Ain't they schmucks? Plucking them feathers off of them ducks. Plucking them mallards, plucking them coots, plucking they duck hairs out by the roots. Look at them duck pluckers, ain't they thieves? Some use tweezers, some use teeth. Them feather-filting duck pluckers hiding in the sticks, bugging them plucky ducks, getting they kicks. How to be a duck plucker? No way to duck it. Rustle up a duck, shoo boy, just pluck it. Them doodle dashers. I just got a couple more. How about them doodle dashers? Ain't they jewels jumping out of bushes, waving they tools? jumping out of palm trees, jumping out of shrubs, leaping out of flower beds, waving they nubs. Look at them doodle dashers, ain't they queer? Flagging they tallywhacker, then disappear. Them ever-loving doodle dashers, ain't they pearls? Waving them doodle knobs at them girls. How to be a doodle dasher? Don't need a ticket. Get your dandy doodle handy, jump from a thicket. And this is the one I've memorized. How about them hors d'oeuvres? Ain't they sweet? Little piece of cheese, little piece of meat. Thank you.
I couldn't help thinking of Roger Miller through all that. That's kind of got that Roger Miller. Yeah. Yeah, Roger Miller. If you don't, there's an album out that's talking about. It's called King of the Road, and it's a tribute to Roger Miller. And it's a bunch of people doing covers of Roger Miller songs, and Roger Miller is doing some of the songs too, and it's pretty amazing. That's great, Doug. Mason, he lived up in Oak Ridge for a while.
Out west of, east of Eugene, or did.
Yeah, up in Oak Ridge, yeah. Yeah. Sort of, haha.
But Mason Williams' book, Bicyclist Dismount, Colors, and then he had the bus book, which was a full-size silhouette of a Greyhound bus. Is that
You can't order that on Amazon. Okay. Hey,
You can introduce this guy.
Richard Norris
Yeah.
is a son of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, Lenore, North Carolina, and an adopted son of the Pacific Northwest. He is or has been a journalist, broadcaster, musician, poet, educator, firefighter, and forest lookout. And tonight he's reading an entry from his lookout journal from Picket Butte, lookout in the southern Cascades of Oregon. And I would say he's not just the son of North Carolina, Blue Ridge. He's the son of, he's a cross between Meat Camp, his father's country, and his mother's country is Wilson Holler. And we actually shared, and we climbed Grandfather Mountain, and we drank. We ate the quintessence. We ate a moon pie and a cheer wine, and then we immediately went into diabetic coma. So, Richard Norris, and he's a great friend.
Have to give me a minute to adjust the reading material because I'm operating on one contact tonight. So let's hope this goes smoothly. So this is indeed an entry from my Picket Butte Lookout Journal. Spent 2 years on Picket Butte and 2 years on Acker Rock Lookout. A couple of terms that may be helpful in listening to this selection. Tiller is the name of the ranger station I reported to. And, thank you, John. And a helitack crew is the crew, the firefighting crew that travels by helicopter. So this is August 6th, 1975. Picket Butte, this is Tiller. 07:45 on this midsummer's morn, and it looks and feels like mid-November. Must be true what they're saying about the new ice age. Thank goodness my radio microphone is within reach of my sleeping bag. Tiller, this is Picket Butte. My voice sounds like fingernails writing down a slate board. Good morning, Dick. How's the weather up your way? Well, the helitack crew is on the prowl again, it seems. These guys can pick some real dandy mornings to go flying around the forest. Ceiling's about 4,000 feet, Lonnie, and holding in there, I growl back. All right, we may be up your way this morning, Dick. Thanks. Tiller bye. 10-4, Picket Butte clear. To be clear, things were not clear on Picket Butte. In fact, the last thing that was clear was the dream I just was jolted from. Bob Dylan was singing, "Hey, Mr. Tambourine Now, Man," on this forestry school lawn at Oregon State. But now I was forced to deal with the realities of this gray, foggy morning on this wooden stump of the Cascades. To my credit, I didn't hesitate and quickly curled up into a fetal position and slid to the bottom of my bag. Just as I was congratulating myself on taking such efficient action, a parade of voices crackled out of the radio as each of the Umpqua National Forest lookouts signed on for the day with a cheery 10-8. There was no hope for me. Gray, dark, and dreary as it may be, I was driven from my bed to cope the best I could with this bizarre Cascade weather. Actually, it wasn't as cold as I expected as I dressed and headed for the catwalk railing to take my morning leak. Damp, yes, but not too bad. It might not be such a bad morning after all, I thought, and about that time the radio jumped to life again. Picket Butte, Helicopter 186, we'll be landing up there shortly for some helispot maintenance. So, the pride of Tiller Fire Control was going to pay me a visit. Helispot maintenance indeed. Loosely translated, that works out to, "Good morning, Dick, you better have a big pot of coffee on." No way these guys are going to be working on a morning like this. They're looking for a place to hole up for the morning, and Picket Butte fits the bill. A few minutes later, the roar of the engine breaks the muffled air of the morning, and 186 swings around above the lookout tower to begin its descent to the helipad, perched on the very edge of the west face of this butte. Vern, the pilot who flew in Nam, hovers directly above the pad and slowly, accurately lowers the bird to the ground. The power of that machine is incredible. Every tree within 100 yards bends and sways. The brush looks as if it will be uprooted at any minute, and the lookout tower itself shakes under the terrific wind stirred up by the 3 giant rotors. Simon the cat even sticks his head out the door to see what the hell's going on. Engine shutdown was followed in short order by a stream of 4 bright yellow-shirted figures piling out of the chopper. "Coffee ready, Dick?" hollered Lonnie, crew foreman. "Hell no, Lonnie, you got to give a man a bit more warning, you know." I quickly lit a fire in the old Columbus boxwood stove, congratulating myself on spending some time last night with my axe and the firewood. And as the cabin filled with warmth and the comforting smell of wood smoke, I started pot number 1 for the morning. The troops rapidly stormed the tower, and when Vern threw himself on the bed and started reading a book, I knew that I had been blessed with company for the remainder of the morning. That chopper wasn't going anywhere as long as its pilot had a warm place to rest and a cup of hot coffee on a cold morning like this. Flying around at 5,000 feet in a big bird with no doors can prove to be a bit chilly. Before the crew was finally ready to take off into the gray yonder, we had gone through 2 pots of Dick's house blend, lunch, and a few stories from Vern's crazy trip to Mexico. Not to mention a flurry of excitement when someone caught sight of a fork-torn buck down below the tower. Danny bet Vern that he could sneak up within 100 feet of the old boy, and the chase was on. But with a bright yellow Helitack shirt and an unfavorable wind, Dan didn't have a chance as he trooped among the trees and the brush. Not having had an opportunity to inspect Teller's big electronic buzzard, I trooped off to the helipad, radio in hand, to check it out. Simon followed close behind and in a twinkling had jumped into the cockpit and was cautiously exploring among the jumble of knobs, wires, and switches. That crazy cat eventually cruised every nook and cranny of the ship from the bubble to the rudder, and when Lonnie picked him up and set him on top of one of the big rotor blades, everybody cracked up. Vern snatched his camera and shot a one-of-a-kind photo of this big, brown, blue-eyed Siamese sitting on the end of a rotor with the lookout tower in the background. Lonnie slowly spun the rotor, and Simon enjoyed a quick merry-go-round ride on top of an Alouette llama. That just may be a first for both felines and the Forest Service. The crew filed back into the ship, donned their helmets, and headed back for the tower. I headed back for the tower as Vern started the engine and the ground began to vibrate. I reached the catwalk as the big blades began to spin, and suddenly the ship rose swiftly from the mountaintop, straight up into the gray soup, toward the south, and was gone. Roseburg Helicopter 186 is 4-3 from Picket Butte and heading for Hamlin Prairie for helispot maintenance. There's no coffee at Hamlin Prairie. They may actually have to do some work today. Thank you.
that's okay. Well, I'm not going to read that.
I have the introduction of our last reader, but before we let him loose on the microphone, I wanted to ask your permission, if you will, to let Alison read a piece which she told me she had prepared for, and I think we'll let her do that. And we'll let John go first, and then Alison, you can close the show. All right?
Okay.
All right. So here's the introduction for John. John Lee is the intrepid host of Acoustic Village, a 4G Northwest craftsman sustained and nurtured by music, mountains, rivers, and books. During the pandemic, he encountered 31 new birds. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
31 new to you or 31 new to Audubon?
31 new to me.
Okay. All right. Actively tried not to write any more songs and bought a project house. A project house. A fixer-up. You know what? Using that word "project" is kind of. If you were in Brooklyn, you'd be.
Yeah, it's not in the projects. It's
a project house on Long Beach Peninsula. Yeah. How many bedrooms is it going to have, John?
It depends on how you count them.
Okay. So, when his home is complete, he will put together a kick-ass rock and roll band, write his novel, and eat great quantities of local seafoods. I give you Mr. John Lee.
So, when the house is completed, I'll have a little over 600 square feet, 5 minutes from the bay and 5 minutes from the beach. And I'll have a living room with a Yodel wood stove and a corner desk for writing, and an upstairs loft where you can smell and hear the ocean, and a kitchen with a corner table, and the 2 back bedrooms. One is actually going to be a recording studio.
This real estate advert is coming out of your time.
Yeah, and the other one's actually going to be my wood shop, so I'm going to learn to hand cut dovetails. Anyway, I started writing fiction again during the pandemic, besides looking for birds. And this is an excerpt from a short story I wrote about my fictitious self. It's a 10-year-old boy living in Milwaukee, Oregon. That's IE. And his grandmother has come to live with him. And the dynamic is that his family is ABC, his father's side, American-born Chinese, 4th generation, fairly well assimilated, but still pretty Chinese. But his mother's family and my mother's family was 2G, and they were much more embarrassingly Chinese sometimes. Okay. As the rain settled in, Jimmy usually came straight home to play his trumpet, do his homework, do his chores, work on a model, read comics, or look at his baseball cards, while his friends were undoubtedly drinking Hawaiian punch, eating Velveeta on Wonder Bread sandwiches, and watching the Three Stooges and Popeye cartoons. After-school television was strictly forbidden in the Leong family, but Jimmy reasoned that Pa was an adult, and she was Mother's mother, so she must outrank Mother. He knew she was curious about the television, always watched from her straight-back wooden chair when the family watched in the evenings. One day, Jimmy showed how to turn on and adjust the TV. Technically, Pa had turned it on, not Jimmy, so it was okay. Pa loved television. The Three Stooges came on at 3 o'clock, and it quickly became her favorite. They both loved the slapstick physical humor, violence, and general mayhem. Jimmy could mimic all 3 voices and mannerisms, especially Curly's snicker, Larry's resigned victimhood, and Moe's general nastiness. They both laughed uproariously whenever Moe poked Larry in the eyes or punched Shemp in the face, or when a ladder collapsed, a cow ran amok, or a car ran over a fence. Pa started imitating Curly's snicker and began to repeat phrases like, "You idiot!" and "hoo hoo hoo," and laughed uproariously. Jimmy began speaking more Chinese with Pa. She never made fun of the way he said things, the way the adults or the F.O.B. Wong cousins did. He never made fun of how she said things in English. They never spoke these phrases around anyone else and always pretended not to understand when spoken to by anyone else. They both understood that there was a power in knowing things when others thought you did not. Right after the Three Stooges came Popeye's Pier 12. They could watch the first segment if they turned off the TV at 3:43 just before Nicky came in the back door. That year, Jimmy noticed that a Paul had planted a lot of spinach. Reluctantly, Jimmy grabbed the hated hoe and trowel and headed off to the garden. Paul was standing and tending and watering young radishes and bok choy at the shaded far end of the garden, closest to the apple tree. Jimmy's job was to weed the rows of corn and beans at the other end, closest to the street. Jimmy loved being with his grandmother, but he hated working in the garden. A baseball game of sorts would be likely developing in the vacant lot across the street. He knew he was supposed to pull each weed by the roots, but he usually just opted to chop them out with a hoe because he could move a lot faster. Jimmy began to furiously hoe the weeds between the rows of corn and beans. He needed to pull the individual weeds between the individual plants by hand, carefully pulling each nasty weed with the root intact. These he set aside to put on top of the weed pile to cover up the ones he would chop out with the hoe. Father did meticulous checks in people's mouths, and he applied the same diligent scrutiny to his children and their assigned chores. Jimmy needed to get some high points on his chore chart. He would put away the hoe before anyone else got home. Jimmy was determined to do a good job with the corn and beans. He secretly knew that he was the only boy on the planet who struggled to do what he was supposed to do, certainly the only one in his extended family. He dropped the hoe and diligently weeded around the young corn and bean clusters the way Paul had shown Nicky and him, with Father looking on approvingly. He knew that if he pulled a weed completely by the roots, it would not grow back. He knew that these plants would produce delicious sweet corn and green beans, but all of that was months away. Right now, it was warm and sunny, and without looking up, he could tell that kids were gathering in the vacant lot across the street. He could hear their voices, hear someone, probably Paul Freeman, hitting fungos to the outfield, and the sound of the ball settling into a well-worn, freshly oiled Wilson or Rawlings mitt. First bouncer fly, thought Jimmy. He needed to get enough points in his chore chart to earn the citizenship in the home merit badge he needed to make Star Scout. He had more than enough merit badges to earn Star, but he needed to get that stupid required citizenship in the home. Star Scout led to Life Scout, and Life Scout was the next step to Eagle Scout. Nicky was a Life Scout working on his Eagle. 5 of their cousins had earned their Eagle Scout badge. He was determined to be good this time, but it was not fair. No one else had to weed their garden. He picked up the hoe and began working furiously. He could hear a pole working at the other end of the garden, making Three Stooges sounds to herself. "Hey, Jimmy, we need a cutoff man. Come and get your glove," came the call from the edge of the street. Jimmy didn't need to look up to know it was Gil Ballard, his leadoff batting shortstop double play, double steal partner. "Oh, I have to finish weeding the stupid garden." "Do it later, Jimmy. We need a few more guys right now to play workup. There's just Paul, Bob, Dave Morgan, some girls, and some little kids." "Do it later." Fatal words to hear for an impulsive 6th grade boy on a warm spring day faced with a choice between weeding the garden with his grandmother or playing baseball with his friends. "Cam's not there yet?" "Nope, not yet." They both knew that Cam Douglas would show up eventually. Jimmy avoided Cam Douglas. Jimmy briefly considered his options, dropped the hoe, and ran into the garage to get his mitt. He'd made decent progress, had a decent pile of weeds, some with complete roots. "Okay, I'll just play till Nicky gets home, and then I'll finish weeding." When Gil was safely out of earshot, Jimmy said something to Paul in his poor but secretly improving Chinese, something like, "I'm going to play ball just until Nicky comes home, then I'll finish weeding the corn and beans." What came out was more like, "Ball, Nick, beans, maybe." Paul somehow understood and looked with affection at her naughty 7th grandson and replied in similarly incoherent English, "Corn, beans, you idiot!" and mimicked Mo poking Larry in the eyes. Jimmy grinned, responded with a curt blocked her eye poke with his right hand, and ran off after Gil. He would do it later. He would only play till Nicky got home, and then finish the weeding and put away the hoe before anyone else got home. Apo, satisfied with the young shaded bok choy and radishes, moved on to her next task, gathering tender spring greens for dinner. They grew in abundance after the gentle rains gave way to long days of cool sunlight, if you knew where to find them. Apo knew where to find them. That story takes place in Ardenwald, right up the street from downtown Milwaukee, which when I grew up was kind of like Mayberry.
All right. Seth Llewellyn, right?
You know the story of Seth Llewellyn?
Well, just that he came out from the Midwest, and didn't his worker Bing develop the Bing cherry?
Got to interject this.
Yep.
Seth Llewellyn was an orchardist in the Clackamas, Milwaukee area, and he was a very successful orchardist. There's a school, Seth Llewellyn School, named after him in the North Clackamas School District. His lead man was Bing, who was a tall, probably from the northern part of China, and he was an excellent horticulture. And they developed the dark, rich, sweet cherry we call the Bing cherry now. And to Seth Llewellyn's credit, they did not call it the Llewellyn cherry, they called it the Bing cherry. And so it's one of the few times the Chinese guy got the recognition.
Yeah.
For it. So I always only eat Bing cherries.
All right. Well, Allison is coming up. And I think it's one of the duties of open mics like this is to encourage people who perhaps haven't done this before.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And
I know I'm young, but it's been a while.
to encourage people to step up and read.
All right, this is the first prose. Am I close enough? Is this good? This is the first prose poem I ever wrote, and it's one of my favorite poems that I've written. It's about this guy I dated in college. I'm listening to the sound of your silence, the same sound the snow makes as it hits the ground. Your silence is cold too, like the snow. It covers my thoughts the way your lips used to cover mine. But those are sealed with the silence. The distance between us growing and the space the words used to take up. I try to plow through, but the silence has the cold stubbornness of ice. During the Ice Age, snow formed bridges between continents. During our silence, our bridges burn. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And so that concludes our spoken word evening. So let's thank Allison for being at the bar. And let's see, Gary Fellow is not here. He had to leave. And I think
Sarah Wolf's back
Sarah
there.
is back there.
She's the pretty half of the Pretty Gritty group,
Yeah.
I think.
And that ugly guy next to her is what, Bob Howard?
Mr. Bob
Yeah,
Howard.
thank him. Yeah,
Saint
Bob.
Boho, the patron saint of Artichoke music.
All right. Thanks
And,
to all our readers
yeah.
tonight for coming and reading. I think I promised a broad range of material, and I think that happened.
We did.
Yeah. So I thank my co-host John.
Thank you, Mr. Bob Sterry.
And that's it. for
We'll be
us.
taking a break from the open mics through August, and we'll be starting again on September 9th, whatever it is. It's the first, it's the second Thursday. And unless, we get overwhelmed by Delta, we're going to be right in here, probably masked up. Performers can be up here. And I have not got the theme for the first two. The second one's going to be migration, I think. But there can be like wildlife migration, it can be human migration, it could be, anything. And the first one, I'm not quite sure.
So it could be the poems of Genghis Khan, right?
It may just be just your favorite song, or the song that got you through the pandemic. All right. So thank you very much for coming in, and we're done for the evening.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
guys.